All right, let's just dive right into this one. Welcome to This Explainer, where today we are unpacking a massive 800-year-old unsolved enigma. We're talking about the final resting place of one of history's most infamous conquerors, Genghis Khan. Even 8 centuries after his death, his tomb is completely undiscovered. It's essentially a ghost story wrapped in history. Some experts say it's just never going to be found. Others, well, they actually believe in this incredibly dark myth that the day his tomb is finally unearthed, the world as we know it will literally end. So today we're going to explore the facts, sift through the myths, and look at the absolute geographical nightmares that make finding him basically an impossible task. Now, to really grasp the weight of this mystery, we first have to understand the sheer, unprecedented scale of his impact. Genghis Khan was a relentless warlord, right? He commanded the largest contiguous empire the world has ever seen. And the death toll from his conquests is just staggering. We're talking roughly 40 million people. But here is a truly bizarre historical footnote to all that destruction. By wiping out so many people, he actually allowed massive tracts of farmland to just completely return to forest. And because of that, his campaigns literally delayed global warming. Crazy, right? But history is just full of these wild paradoxes. Because despite that unbelievable loss of life, his genetic footprint on the modern world is mind-blowing. 1 out of every 200 people alive on Earth right now is a direct descendant of Genghis Khan. It's a stunning, almost incomprehensible contrast between immense destruction on one hand and an unparalleled biological legacy on the other. So the myths surrounding his bloodline, they're deeply ingrained in reality and they carry this profound sense of dread. Remember that world-ending curse I mentioned a minute ago? Well, it's anchored by a genuinely eerie historical coincidence. See, Soviet archaeologists once opened the tomb of Timur. He was a famous conqueror and a descendant of Genghis Khan over in Turkey. Legend has it his tomb actually bore a warning: if I awake, the whole world will tremble. And wouldn't you know it, just days after they opened that tomb, Nazi Germany invaded the Soviet Union, triggering some of the most horrific, devastating bloodshed of World War II. It's exactly that kind of history that makes people take the curse of Genghis Khan very, very seriously. Because of all this bloody history, depending on where you grew up, your view of him is likely entirely different. In Western media, Genghis Khan is almost always villainized as this ruthless barbarian. It's a stark contrast to figures like Alexander the Great, who kind of gets glorified in the West despite doing a lot of the same warmongering. But if you look at Mongolian tradition, the narrative completely flips. Over there, he is revered. He's the ultimate hero, a visionary leader, and to some, even a direct messenger of God. Section 1. The Secret Burial. After a 45-year reign building this unmatched empire, he died while on a campaign to conquer the Western Xia Empire in China. But how did he actually die? That is a total blur of wildly conflicting theories. Was he poisoned by his enemies? Was he murdered by a captured princess? Or maybe he just fell off a wild horse or slowly succumbed to an old hunting injury. We just don't know for sure. The only absolute certainty is that he died during that Xia campaign, and the sheer secrecy surrounding his final days was executed flawlessly. His followers went to unbelievable, terrifying lengths to hide his grave. This is basically a dark thriller. First, the soldiers carrying his coffin slaughtered every human, dog, or cat that saw the procession. Just total silence on the road. Then, after burying him, they trampled the grave with 1,000 horses to completely flatten the earth. Some legends even say they diverted an entire river to flow over the site. And to guarantee absolute silence, the soldiers who buried him were executed 100 miles away. Then, another group of soldiers executed those executioners before finally taking their own lives. The location literally died with them in a river of blood. But guys, there's a fascinating twist to all this. A prominent theory suggests all of that massive bloodshed might have just been a decoy. Some historians believe the buried coffin was completely empty, and the real body was secretly transported back to Mongolia, maybe near the Anon River where he grew up, or the Birkenkalden mountain range. And we know from Marco Polo's accounts that a later Mongol leader, Genghis Khan, had a very similar secretive burial that cost the lives of 20,000 people. So a massive, deadly decoy operation, it's entirely plausible. Section 2. The Progressive Emperor. Born as Temujin, his early life was so far from royal privilege, it's not even funny. After his father was murdered by enemies, his tribe just abandoned his family. Temujin literally had to survive as a slave for years. He built his strength from the absolute bottom.
And he started breaking rigid traditions really early on, when his wife, Borte, was kidnapped by the Merkit tribe, which was actually a pretty common accepted practice of wife stealing back then. He completely rejected that tradition. He gathered allies and fought a fiercely brutal battle simply to rescue her. He just completely broke the mold as a ruler. He tossed aside aristocratic bloodlines. If you had the skill, you got promoted. Period. End of story. He cared deeply for his soldiers' welfare instead of treating them like disposable pawns. He built an empire-wide postal system, rolled out paper money, established written laws, massively expanded trade along the Silk Road, and actually welcomed defeated enemies right into his own ranks instead of just slaughtering them all. And perhaps most surprisingly, he championed religious freedom. While he practiced shamanism himself, he completely refused to tax other religions, which was a highly unusual and progressive policy for that era. Everyone could practice freely. Plus, he wasn't just this mindless, bloodthirsty conqueror. His wars were often highly calculated responses. For example, he obliterated the Persian Khwarezmian Empire only after they foolishly murdered his peaceful ambassadors. The guy was a strategic genius who routinely won battles against forces way, way larger than his own. Section 3. The Unsolved Mystery. So, with all our modern tech, ground-penetrating radar, satellite imagery, you'd really think we'd have found him by now, right? Well, the first impenetrable barrier we hit is a total lack of data. There are absolutely zero proven historical records or pieces of concrete evidence from 800 years ago to help pinpoint a search zone. We are looking for a needle in a haystack, except we don't even know which haystack to start looking in. Then you have the geographical nightmare. To put this in perspective visually, Mongolia is massive. At 1.6 million square kilometers, it's roughly 11 times the size of Bangladesh. Yet Mongolia's population is a mere 3.2 million, compared to Bangladesh's 170 million. You have this staggeringly huge landmass that is practically empty. And of that tiny population, half of them are concentrated right in the capital city of Ulaanbaatar. The other half are scattered all across the country, with many still living a nomadic lifestyle. This means the vast, harsh terrain of Mongolia, the unforgiving mountain ranges, the massive deserts, the steppes, they are incredibly hauntingly empty. Out there, it is just you and an endless, isolated horizon. And to make matters worse, consider the actual logistics of searching. Only 2% of the entire country has paved roads. 2%. Imagine trying to drag heavy archaeological equipment across rugged mountains in sub-zero temperatures, entirely on dirt paths. The freezing cold makes basic movement, let alone meticulous scientific research, nearly impossible. It is just a sheer physical struggle. But hey, people have certainly tried. National Geographic actually launched a massive, highly technologically advanced effort. They used non-invasive ground radar, and they crowdsourced 10,000 people to pore over high-resolution satellite imagery, searching for any anomalies in the landscape that might indicate a hidden tomb. Did they find other graves from the era? Sure. But Genghis Khan? Still completely invisible. And finally, we hit the ultimate cultural blockade. The most likely resting place, the Birkenhelden mountain range, has been declared a UN World Heritage Site. This means absolutely all excavation and digging is strictly banned. But honestly, more importantly, this honors the wishes of the Mongolian people. They actively revere the mystery. They see him as their greatest hero. And out of deep respect, they simply do not want his final rest disturbed by shovels and cameras. Which leaves us with a final, pretty provocative thought to take away from all of this. Between the complete lack of records, the brutal geography, the legal protections, and the deep cultural reverence, the lost tomb remains perfectly hidden. But hovering above all of that logic is the 800-year-old myth. If the tomb is ever somehow found and opened, will the world truly end? When you think about the insane lengths they went to bury him, and the chilling curse of his bloodline, it really makes you wonder if this one mystery is better left completely undisturbed. Think about that for a bit. Thanks so much for joining me on this